All right. Finished Dune at lunchtime today at work, which makes it so exciting that I have this whole weekend to choose what I'm going to go into. Now I'm midway through Memories of Ice. I need to keep going to wrap up the Dan trilogy, and I have all these other things to do, but let me give you my thoughts on Dune. Now, I have gone into this. This wasn't the first time that I've tried to start this, which is surprising because I love sci-fi, and Dune is one of those foundational works in sci-fi. And I just never finished it. I always just got my eyes on other things midway through. I don't know what it was, but I finally finished it and, kind of ripped through it in maybe a week and a half or something like that. And really, I was wanting to watch the movies. I'm excited now that I've done this. I can go and watch the movies and enjoy it more. And short story, I will most definitely be reading the sequels of this book, and I will most definitely be reading it again, who knows when, but it's sooner than later, I will just say. Now, when it comes to sci-fi, I sort of branch it off in a couple different areas. Sometimes you have the very grounded Earth-based sci-fi where something strange is just kind of going on out there that they have to, identify and figure out and whatever. And then you get more to and I would kind of call that more of the Star Trek sort of sci-fi. Now, I know I'm going to be, by bringing these two, these two different franchises in, I know that can be a little explosive. And I was always more of a Star Trek sort of guy, even though I can see where there's a lot of mix between Star Trek and Star Wars in some ways. Now, a lot of what I like, you can see where there's influence in all these different sci-fi works, where sometimes it's more of a Star Trek sort of thing, and then a Star Wars sort of thing, where the reason why we have the genre sci-fantasy would be most definitely because of books like Dune. And I always thought that Star Wars was more of a fantasy anyway. But Dune has such a great mixture of everything. Now, I am not this is my first time finally getting through it. And these are also my immediate thoughts. So something that I found so interesting and great about this book is it was very much propelled by its ideas. Now, there have been a lot of other books that have come out that remind me of it. Books like the Sun Eater series, which I've only read the first one, and I hear it only gets better from there, where it sort of reminds me of Dune, where there's this economy between worlds and factions and houses and kind of like a larger Game of Thrones on a cosmic sort of scale. And Christopher Rocchio of the Sun Eater series, holy smokes, his prose, you can just devour and eat up all of his lines. It's very philosophical, and so was Dune. But there's a strength in the ideas of Dune that kind of stands on its own, which where I maybe didn't love the same kinds of writing. If somebody was to write this in the last 10 years, I know that they would have made a few creative changes. Now, the thing that was so jarring at first, and this is a part of the omniscient narrative, which is very similar to what we would get in like Lord of the Rings or Moby Dick, or like Anna Karenina or something like that. You always kind of are told what is going on in the minds of of these characters, it so reminds me of reading with my mom, or how I now read. I just read through Harry Potter with my daughter, and in the middle of like a dialogue between people, I would put it down and say, "Do you know why she said that? Like, do you know what they're just to kind of get her back on track." And my mom used to do that to me, just all this extra context. And holy smokes, Frank Herbert does that more than anybody I know. And that might drive some people up the wall. Because you kind of just know what everyone is thinking in any given scene. You will have our main character Paul talking, and he will know, we'll get into his head as after he says something, and then it'll have this person who we clearly know is going to betray them, because every time it gets to them, mentions his thoughts that he's going to betray him, and then lo and behold, and it just kind of goes through that, where often people will withhold that in a more modern telling, where we will get our main character, and unless it switches POV, that's really the only person we really get into. And then it does a lot more showing and not telling. There's a lot of telling in this. And even in the villains, perspectives and everyone, we just get that. And in that regard, it kind of threw me off a little bit. But I'm used to maybe some of that style of storytelling with a lot of the older books that I read, where it has no qualms with going right into the mind of the characters. Now, a lot of people, speaking of Lord of the Rings, and how a lot of people will say that Dune is kind of the Lord of the Rings of the sci-fi world, and I would agree that certainly it is with the sci-fantasy sort of element of it. There are things that really don't. I wouldn't say that for all types of sci-fi. Like I wouldn't think things like a lot of the stuff we get from like Arthur C. Clarke, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm so wrong on that. Let me know. But it certainly is a pillar of the genre. But speaking of things like Lord of the Rings, and a lot of people will love the movies even more than the books. And typically you will find people who say, that's like a heresy in the book world to like a movie more than you like the book. But even I'm not sure what I would think. I've read The Lord of the Rings a couple times, maybe 3 times now. But I sure love those movies. And a part of it might be in that telling, letting everybody know always what's going on is maybe a little overly verbose. Like I'm reading The Hobbit with my daughter, and she's like, why? Like we always know everything in the room, and it's just very slow moving for us. Dune has some of that as well. And if it's compared to The Lord of the Rings, even though I love reading The Lord of the Rings and I loved reading this, I am so looking forward to these couple movies and hoping that they stand up. Maybe I'll let you know what I think after I've read them. But I thought it was great. I've put it off far too long. I read the first 100 pages like several times, and there's just something about a desert. Like I'm not into Mad Max for some reason. Just a desert just is so dull to me. But man, was it ever not what I thought it was. I just was hooked as soon as I just got past that initial hurdle that for some reason just wasn't sticking with me. There are some standout characters that I just love and I grieve for. I can't wait to see what happens next. I know that a lot of people will read this as a standalone. I can't imagine it though, because it just seems like this is where things, the story's most definitely not done, and I would recommend it. I'd recommend it to anyone who's into science fiction or fantasy, even if it's just to kind of, to just, you don't want to read something large like this just to tick it off the list. But it is a foundational thing, and I think it's good to... I'm glad I have it under my belt, and I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed it. So I will talk to you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.